All right. You know, I mean, if I'm telling you what the best possible scenario is for our middle school leadership, it's not to have a teaching principal.
Correct.
I guess that needs to be clear. That's my perspective, but I think also in kind of offloading some of the administrative duties and increasing another administrator's time, I think the net result is just a redistribution of the administrative duties across the team. So, I think the athletic program will thrive under one person in charge of the whole continuum of programs.
That seems to make the most sense.
But,
Is having one AD for the district.
Yeah, I mean, this is where we've always kind of, right, OMS is not that big, so just principal of OMS is not quite, it's hard to justify as a full-time FTE. And we've gone on all these configurations back and forth. And for a while now, we've been kind of but I can see a lot of rationales for it. I agree, having 180 across sports, there's certain management efficiencies that seem obvious. And I mean, my day sounds a bit like there's two categories. There's fighting fires and doing the things that are important long term, right? And fighting, if you have too many fighting fires, you never get to do anything long term. That's just the reality. You already have building manager, you already have discipline, and now I think most AD, I mean, I've been in the building, I've been meeting with Meredith when with the walkie-talkies. Pete, you have to cover spelling, the spelling bee, and there's nobody at the chess team, right? And all of a sudden you're in two places at once, neither of which are instructional. So I do get, makes a lot of sense to me that when you have three categories of your job that are fires that are always instant demand, right? It would be hard for me to focus on the longer term goals of instructional. So that those all make sense to me.
there's some other impacts of this we haven't talked about. There's impact of the high school administration that's impacted by this. And Sam does great work with kids, and her office is always busy. It would limit her time in some ways, in some days. I mean, probably not every day, but probably more than half. It also, will impact Reg, because Sam will have to offload some things to Reg. It impacts our high school PE department, as mentioned. I think, Mike has indicated, to me, I don't want to put words in your mouth, he's willing to do what's needed. I know he has some hesitation about moving forward with the plan. He's been a teacher for how many years, Mike? And stepping away from that is not altogether a comfortable feeling for him. So, I mean, there's some other things that haven't been said that I think need to be heard, especially when you say, we're at the point now, I think, where we're talking about, is this the right thing to make regardless of whether or not we need to make it for financial reasons? And I would say it would be a premature decision to make for any reason other than desperate financial times at this point.
I would fully.
So, the other impact of going from 90 instead of 119 is that we're only putting we're putting half an FTE instead of one FTE in the middle school, right?
Well, we haven't really talked about ASA. I think we need to talk about that piece, because that's the other half FTE. Because the 93 is replacing the retirement with a new full-time teacher. And so realizing the retirement savings of that and taking out the 64,318 that was the extra teacher budgeted. So doing that does not address the enrollment bubble, and that's where the ASA 0.5. So in this new scenario now, though, it's really dividing a teacher in half of the day in ASA and half of the day in OMS, which is kind of where we started with all of this. And it wasn't until the retirement that we kind of shifted our thinking a little. Right, how to accommodate that.
I just want to comment on the instructional leadership piece, because my teaching this year, AP Computer Science, wasn't about an opportunity for instructional leadership. It was like, I want to make sure we offer AP Computer Science at the high school. So I know where you're coming from around that opportunity, but I think as a principle, that instructional leadership comes in other areas. It doesn't need to be teaching in order to be an instructional leader. Mine was like, the only way to offer that class was someone had to teach it, so it was going to be me. So I don't feel like that's a necessary component to instructional leadership, is teaching the class.
Do you feel that you gained from as far as?
Oh yeah,
overall?
I think that's like an unintended
Yeah.
benefit was, I had a number of positive comments in the fall from teachers who said, I think it's great we're in the classroom, that's awesome. I'm a teacher, so I love being in the classroom, but I made a conscious decision into administration that I wouldn't have that opportunity. So I'm lucky that I'm doing it this year, but my motivation wasn't around instructional leadership, it was around making sure our kids had that opportunity to grow the STEM program at high school.
And with that being said, I don't know, you have almost 400 kids. I don't know if I could be able to do it at that point, but being in a smaller school, that it could be a possibility. Again, if we have to do that, it's not ideal.
Okay. So can I just say a couple of things? I think some, in listening to Mark, I think some of my concerns are the same as his. I certainly do not mind taking on middle school AD. I think the 612 model shows that it works around in the area schools that have it and across the state. I think it has some continuity. It makes things easier in terms of scheduling, especially when you share facilities. It's not constant back and forth. I have control over all of the athletic calendars. So, and I like to think that one of my pluses are my he has to be out of the building with his AD piece with meetings. I'm assuming that may be one a month. And I have one a month that I have to be, so that doubles. So that means that I'm out of the building more.
Because the people out in the public can't hear. The YouTube video can't hear.
It's cutting in and out a little bit.
No, it's the town's tech equipment.
So that piece, when I'm out of the building, all of these extra things that supervision and whatnot now gets reg. And I'm concerned for Sam. I think it's a lot for her to, without speaking for her, but I think there's some concern for her too, that never feeling like she's gonna be in the right place at the right time to handle kids in need. And so I'm concerned about that. Game supervision is still gonna conflict. There is, especially during the winter time, when we have middle school basketball games going on, and we have high school events going on at the same time. So regardless of whether I take that on or not, there's still gonna have to be some money put into the budget to assist with supervision. Someone's gonna have to be in that role. I just strongly feel that we should have administrative presence at all of our events, because that allows our coaches to do what we're paying them to do, and that's coach. They shouldn't have to deal with crowd control. They shouldn't have to deal with things that are not directly related to the kids that they're responsible for. And you know, I think a big thing for me, and I hope it doesn't sound selfish, but again, I'm getting to the backside of my career now, and if I were to become full admin, that takes me out of the seniority of what I've been doing for 27 years. And furthermore, you know, I've worked with people that it's going to directly impact, and programs it's going to directly impact. And if I get removed from the classroom, someone's going to have to teach my load, and that's going to have to be one of my colleagues, which I think is going to have a trickle effect on the middle school, potentially the middle school phys ed program, which I know Chad and Kristen have just worked tirelessly to make what it is, and Reg alluded to the lifetime activities. You know, I look at that 6th grade class right now with almost 70 kids, and thinking to myself that potentially one phys ed teacher could be dealing with 34 kids. You know, I don't know. I mean, it's just a lot of question marks, and I just think there's a lot of moving pieces that have to come in. And I would be willing, what would it look like if I taught one class per semester and took on 2 of the 5 sections that had to be taken on, so that we could keep instruction and the quality of programs the way that we have them, and still take on the middle school AD piece. And will you do that?
So, can I say 2 things?
Sure.
And I think we need to talk about the ASIP part of this. But I think that right now at the high school, Sam and Reg come to athletic events because you right now can't do all of those. And one thing that I know Keith and I talked about is in this proposal, never was it that Keith was saying, gosh, I'm so glad I'll never have to go to a middle school athletic event again. That's not the frame of this at all. It's that if he's tied up, he can get to the game 20 minutes late and, you know, still see the kids and the kids see them. So that's, I think, one clarification. And then, you know, secondly, I think, and I'll say the bigger elephant in the room is, you know, the sustainability of some of our class sizes that we looked at last time. And I don't want to impact program for sure, but I think when we look at, you know, next year and the next, I hope our budget picture gets better. But it's when you have these large bubbles and when you have new courses coming in and students wanting to take those other courses, it's I think you said it at one of the curriculum meetings, it's a healthy curriculum and a healthy cycle of, you know, updating your course selections, that there is some ebb and flow to what students are taking. And I think, you know, we have to be ready to respond to that and not just kind of continue to offer, you know, so many low enrollment courses that are hard to sustain in this budget climate. So I guess that's kind of a bigger thing that I know is an incredibly unpopular thing to say, but I think we have to begin to create a strategy for how we're going to address that. And I think one of them is around, recruitment of tuition students, to bolster our numbers more. That's a big strategy I think we need to talk about. That's a long-term strategy. But I think also, just thinking about how to react to those ebb and flows of both enrollment levels that come through, and enrollment dips that come through, and then when you get to the high school, kind of the course ebb and flow of what students are taking and what they're not. So.
Attracting tuition students has got to be something more than a long-term strategy. Though. For me, that's pretty immediate. But.
Well, I guess it can't help us today.
No,
That's what I'm.
That's 2020. Yeah, so I want to make sure that we hear from the three board members that aren't allowing us, right? So I want to hear Karen, Rochelle, or Eli have anything to add on this. Let me see if I can summarize a consensus position for this moving forward. Any thoughts you want to add, Erin or Michelle?
I want to ask one question that you're saying like, oh, well, this would be for like sort of 1 year or 2 years. This seems like an awful lot of moving and changing of pieces if it's not actually a long-term change or thought. Like, is this really something that you think is kind of temporary and then it's going to change back, or what's that?
So I think it's the ASA shared staff that I see, that one group of kids that's going into 5th grade where there's an opportunity for spare capacity. It all depends on what happens with enrollments below that, but the group right below it is a larger group, so
Yeah.
So
it's that component.
that's what I mean by kind of the one-year solution that I see.
Okay.
There may be another another dip that can help, but I don't see that right now.
And it would be like this other 3 quarters that would be more of a permanent flow chart.
There's 2 options, right? You could move one full-time from ASA, and as you say, have 5th grade. You could have 2 classes, or you could move a half-time from ASA, and also then have them teaching. 5th grade has a rotational model, which I think what we're doing is it's harder to do with 2 teachers, so you can keep 3 teachers part of the time, and keep the rotational model, and as far as I'm concerned, that's an administrative decision to work out. Basically, what we're saying is there's a half FTE that would be going to the middle school
start with, one question that came up was about if you teach not being available to kids as much. I imagine already some of the time you might not be available. Is that true? Or
As of now, am I not
yeah,
available?
I don't know. Already do like meetings or athletic director responsibilities take you? How much of the time does that take you out already?
I wouldn't say athletic director responsibilities, like anytime there's a student or a teacher, that's what I'm doing, right? So,
Unless you're out of the building.
unless I'm out of the building,
So
athletic
just
director,
like once a month?
4 times a year, this past year.
Was it?
President and text, yeah, there's 2 of us. Flip
But there were
top.
2 in a class at a time, right?
Yep, it's been that way for a while.
As
Okay.
far as,
We split the class.
Gotcha.
if we would ever do that, PE can move the configurations, it would never be, it'd be a normal class size, 18 to 20. It wouldn't be that, with the way I kind of looked at it.
And that's at the high school, we're talking about PE class size.
Oh, okay, I thought you were talking about the middle school PE
That's
class.
not part of our,
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just had one more thing to add, which is that I definitely would say as a student, it is nice to see principals of the game, but also having classes with a principal and getting to interact with them outside of just the administrator role definitely is very nice. And that I think would be a big upside to this plan as a student, at least to me as a student, being able to interact with your principal in a way that's not just principal-student would be a big advantage.
Do you have something?
Well, maybe this is bringing up something else really controversial, because we talked about this earlier, but how is this affected when they talk about the high school dropping, some of the PE requirement, and dropping that back by a half a credit or something? Does that then affect these class sizes back to like a smaller rate, or is that something that, I don't really remember where we ended with that, it kind of went to that rate?
To come to the curriculum committees until it's still undecided.
Yeah.
Yeah, that hadn't come into play in any of our conversation around, right now, our typical phys ed class is 15 kids, so there's definitely room there. And that's smaller than a math class. And so there is some room there to grow. Increase in class size.
I'd like to add to that, my experience with PE classes sometimes is that they actually, if some students are absent, can get small enough that it can impede the activity sometimes. Like we get left for playing basketball and we get left with like 11 kids, which isn't enough to make 3 full teams. Or isn't, or you get left with a small enough number that it starts to actually affect activity sometimes. So I would say as a student, larger PE classes is something that
So we have room to
Teachers.
take, yeah, if
To
it's
do that
right
without
off,
any other-
handed off some of the health classes, we have room to take those on. And the effect would be to increase some of the size of the PE classes, but I don't think it would be so large that it's a negative impact. I think it would more, again, it'd be more in line with what you'd expect.
So let me see if I can recap where we're at. Let's see if make sure you get a chance to. Let me just see if I can pull the threads together. I think I'm hearing the board heading towards the 93K option with, meaning not this whole package. So basically capturing the savings for a senior teacher and, dropping the 1 FTE. I think there's still some hope that the board is hoping that somehow there is some relief that's found at the middle school in conjunction with ASA. But I would argue that that's probably more of an admin recommendation than something the board, we shouldn't be sitting here deciding whether the class is rotational, or whether it's a half FTE or 1 FTE that goes up middle school per year. But basically, it's the 93K option. We're hoping the admin team can provide some guidance that provides some relief at OMS on the teaching front. We're under that 93K option, I also noticing the board did find interest in the idea of a 612 AD and maybe reconfiguring in the longer run, not this budget year, but that at least with some interest that I would, again, not want the board to get in the middle of it, go back to the admin team to think through the future. The board did notice there's some interest in thinking through the 612 AD and some reconfiguration of feast time that might potentially let him feel like he has more instructional. Maybe that's one class, I don't know what it is, that's the admin's team. And the board also did notice that with that athletic configuration, we're probably addressing class sizes in the PE program at the high school that aren't necessarily sustainable in the long run. Given that we're addressing class sizes in several other disciplinary areas, that's something that, again, if we go with the 93K, it's probably not this budget year that's being noticed.
Would that have our K through 12 AD also teaching a class?
Just noting that the board had interest in a 612 admin, a less admin, sorry, 612 AD, less AD, I think middle school principal. Anyway, none of this is decided, just noticing interest in some possible class size shifts in the PE, but all we're really deciding, so those are all things we're asking the admin team to talk to us about next year. But all we're really talking about this year, keeping Heath in its current configuration, capturing the savings from the senior to more junior teacher, and dropping the one FTE addition at the middle school, but hoping that the admin team comes up with some sort of a relief plan working with ASA. Is that a reasonable capture of what we're talking about? Does that sound like I'm crazy or missing something big, Meredith?
Well, I think you're right where I am on all of this and what I've heard. I guess the only thing I would say is I would ask that we discuss a little bit about the enrollment bubble issue, because I think, we put forward an idea about using part of an ASA teacher for that. But again, I think it's a one-year solution, and those kids are gonna be there another year after that. So I'd like to hear the board's thoughts on that, and I'd like to have Darcy also address that as well.
Can I weigh in on my thoughts before we'll give Darcy the collector? So, I like what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying, that the details should be left to the admin team. But if you're a K through 12 AD and teach one phys ed class, and you're teach one class at OMS or a full-time principal, and we can get half-time from ASA, that gets us up to 0.75 rather than 5 held at OMS. 0.25 there and 0.5 there.
Yes. For next year. If we did all that.
That's a different proposal.
That's a different,
You need an exposure. Then we'll look at it.
So say again, you're proposing that Mike keep one class and go to a 612 AD,
Correct.
and you take on one class,
Correct, and hopefully we can get 0.5 held from.
so that's 0.75 at middle school
0.75.
instead of.
It's not the one they want, but it's not 5.5 either.
Okay.
and we'd still just replace the retired teacher with.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And like, for my feedback, coming from being a teacher in the district for so long, I had a chance to know the ins and outs, and now as a principal here, I am at every meeting you can imagine, the curriculum, the policy. If I weren't there, I would not be an independent leader, because I wouldn't know what the policies are and what the discussion behind the scenes around curriculum. It's really hard to lead my team without being at those meetings. The AD responsibility is pulling him out of those. He can't be at the same meetings that I'm at to hear the conversation, to understand the background, and then to be able to communicate it with his team. That would debilitate me as a leader in my building. If I didn't have the opportunity to be at all of those meetings and a part of the discussions, that's how I'm learning my role in Orono. And it helps me understand the K-12 piece of it, so I'm not just leading in my own bubble. I understand where the other schools are at and how to help move us along together. So I do like what Mike was saying about keeping the health piece, but also being able to relieve Heath a little bit from the AD so that he can be a part of those meetings. It's really hard to lead when you don't know the background, and it's hard to explain and to have everybody on the same page if you're not there. So if we could think a little bit outside the box about Jake's confusing proposal, but I get it, it might help relieve a few of the responsibilities that keep him out of those meetings.
I think what I heard you say is we have a 0.75, 612 AD, right? And, you know, Heath would pick up that extra little piece of, I mean, you're basically talking about splitting the middle school AD between the lines so that Heath.
Were you guys?
I'm not sure, I think that might be what you said,
No,
but
I'm sorry.
I was
JJ, when you
thinking
say
just.
one class, do you mean one class a year?
No,
Or
no,
one class a semester?
you'd always be teaching, because right now you're 0.5, right?
Correct.
So you teach 2 to 3 classes a semester, right? My proposal is you go down to 1 class a semester, pick up all the AD responsibilities. Heath would teach 1 class a semester, keep his full principalship, and hopefully we can get a 0.5 from ASA to help at OMS.
Who covers the building with decent class?
Peter. And honestly, I'm out of the building so much. Lisa covers me when I'm out, and it's to me, it's a working model. We've figured out a great way to work together. And what Peter can cover, then that's when Mike or Sam, that's when Mike, Sam, Reg, or Meredith, or Sharon are called for me. Already.
One class is how many minutes in a day?
One class is 44 minutes. So are you talking about just one class, or I have one subject that I teach?
Just
So
1 class.
44 minutes. 44 minutes.
All right, so my consensus is we're spinning in the same orbit, but we're not fully consensus.
Yeah, I like where you're headed, Jake, because, I mean, what Darcy's saying is absolutely right. And I think when you talk about the leadership vacuum, I think it's impacted by just what Darcy was saying, that, you know, there are limitations to how he can engage with all of our, you know, after-school K-12 stuff happening during the seasons. Where if someone else had the primary responsibility, then he could, like Reg, doesn't go right out to field hockey when there's a curriculum committee meeting, he comes to that and then he goes out to see field hockey, so
This
I think
doesn't
that's the
solve that
difference.
problem, because Mike has already said it can't be in 2 places at once, so that doesn't solve the problem.
Well, I think for the most part it solves it, and I think where there are conflicts, then we have to adjust, but I think right now, what's happening is, you know, he's never able to come to those meetings, unless they happen during the 4-week, you know, 3-week break window. So I think it does help to solve the problem. It's not gonna work every single meeting.
And
Just
my
like it doesn't
propose
really work
that,
now.
and now it seems like we've left the financial workshop,
Yeah.
like, I think that now this is a really great suggestion, and we can take the next 2 weeks to like mull it over and see what the cons of this, because right now it's like, oh, that sounds great, but then as everyone thinks about it more.
So you're proposing budget-wise, we go with the 93, doesn't mean conversations can't still happen on how the responsibilities are shifted, but financially, we wouldn't make an adjustment right now.
I think what we're saying is we don't want Heath coming to halftime, and we're going with the 93K, and we would like the admin team to come back with a recommendation. For sure in 2 weeks, but I think actually it might, given that it's maybe our last shot, it would be nice if we could get it in a week circulated by email. definitely in this area that we've been, you know, all the things the board's been talking about, come back with a recommendation. Ideally, in a week, but for sure, in 2 weeks, but keeping it at the kind of 93K level.
And are you saying that as well for the ASA? And we're taking out the full teacher, so however we configure that, the ASA teacher is up to admin.
Yeah, if in the 93K, we took out the full one FTE that was in the budget. And some of our goals are keeping Heath very principal focused, getting help at the middle school, addressing sustainable class sizes in all the departments of the high school, and looking at synergies or not synergies by having a 612 TV person. And
Short list for a week.
I mean, you guys are already talking about it, we just spent an hour about it, but
Well, I guess I'm a little uncertain that I'm going to come to, that we're gonna come to a decision on this in a week.
okay.
If it's not financially driven, I'm not sure.
It's not, if it's not financially driven,
I think the plan that Brian offered in the first place of doing a certain thing this year with the direction of looking at these other options for next year, would probably be more feasible, but.
we wouldn't have to make those responsibility shifts for the budget. If it's not gonna impact our financial situation, we wouldn't have to look at it before the budget's passed.
No, that's true. I mean, it wouldn't have to happen before next year, classes for next year. And I don't know, some board members may or may not make a budget vote based on some of these factors, so I think that's something we should, I'm just thinking, Mark, if, I don't know if Mark would feel comfortable with something like teaching a class, if not. So,
It's not budget for the girls.
Right, and that's what I'm getting at. So for budget purposes, there'll be yeah, but because, this is why, I believe, because we're taking the additional, we're replacing the retired teacher, but we're taking out the additional one. But we want to try to get it to at least half, so it doesn't have an implication.
yeah, I mean, we wanna, yeah.
So I guess, you know, I still have not heard the board, and I heard you say, I want the admin to decide about the ASA. I think we have, we've given it to you. I'd like to hear some reaction on that piece because, you know, it's pretty impactful to ASA to make this change, and I'd like to have some board.
So to your point about it's a one-year thing, I've given up trying to have budgets that last for more than a year because the state legislature would put a tail on the dog and we could be in such a terrible situation next year, or we could be in so much better situation that I kind of am very into surviving year to year on the budgets.
Well, in the middle school, after next year, we'll then add in this smaller 4th grade class, right? So that should bring the enrollment back.
So the
down.
7th grade,
Right.
the 8th grade that'll be their next year is another small group, so it's like a,
Right,
It's
so
a small
but
wash.
that's next year, then it's a wash.
No.
no, it's the next year.
Oh, it's the
It's
next
it's a wash for the next 2 years, actually. The trend
It's
actually.
growing next year and then it's a wash steady state for 2 years after that.
Because I thought it was, next year we had, like, the 8th grade that was graduating was about the size of the 5th grade that's going in.
And now, and
But
then this
that
current
4th grade
7th
is
grade
really
class
small.
is small.
Oh, okay,
It's
so.
not as small as the 4th grade, but it's on the
okay,
smaller
I guess
side.
that's the part of that.
Basically, it's next year it'll grow and stay that way for 3 years.
Okay.
So we do have to
Have
eventually
a
get
solution
past
for, we need a
next year.
two-year.
But that's where I come back to the budget situation. I can't predict the budget, so rather than moving this around, I would rather move something around for a year and then see where we're at in a year. So I take, go ahead, Michelle.
The current flow chart diagram that we have, I think the thing that's been a little bit hard for me, and of course I can't read anybody's face except the 3 of you, is how happy you are with this current flow chart. So Meredith, are you saying this is what we've come to with the proposal, this is what we're still happy with, or do you have other thoughts about revising it given tonight's conversation? Because when it was presented earlier, I couldn't tell if this is Heath's idea and he's excited about the
chart and talking about the use of the ASA Adams staff for 1 year, because of the low fifth grade, anticipated numbers for next year. I think that's, a good way to address the problem at the middle school for 1 year. But, you know, I think the next year we have to come back to this and figure it out based on the data we have then. So I see it as a little more challenging though than presented here, given what we've talked about for the left side of the column and where everyone's kind of falling on that. Because now it's looking like if we do it, it would be someone who's spending half of their day at ASA and half of their day at the middle school, which is not the most efficient way to meet either school's needs. But, you know, it's doable. We have teachers that do it right now, and, you know, we have to just build in that loss of time when they have to transition. And there'll have to be flexibility on both sides in looking at schedules and trying to accommodate one another's needs and planning that out. So the left side of the flow chart, I think I've said where I stand on that, but you might not have known it was me. But, you know, I have some hesitation to move forward all in with what we said on the left side of the chart if it's not driven for financial reasons. I think there's some good benefits to parts of it, but I guess I would like to take them out of the budget context. And if we decide to do it, like, you know, Reg deciding to teach that class, that was just kind of on top of everything else that had been decided that year. Reg jumped into that class. And then if he jumps in and does a class, it's on top of whatever else we decide in the context of budget, is where I would like to put that. But, because I think, you know, what I don't like about this is that there are like 50 moving parts to the plan. And like you said, Erin, it's a lot of moving parts, but it's the best we could come up with to accomplish the.
No, I mean, I really appreciate all of the work that went into trying to figure this out, but it's a lot going on.
All right, so let me go back and see if I guess I'm just repeating myself. Maybe we moved, maybe we haven't. So I think I'm going to propose that we say, you know, it's the 93K model, keeping the full-time principal, making the adjustment on the right-hand side, and, you know, having given some feedback to the admin team that we would like to see creativity in the left-hand side without any specific instructions to come back a year from now. Because I'm not really, I think what I'm hearing her say is that there's too many parts to really, if it's not being budget and crisis driven, there's too many, it's not pedagogically smart to make that many changes when it's not a budget driven crisis. And so give them a year to work on the things and the feedback they heard on the left side.
So given that, are we willing to say that there's no additional staff help at OMS for next year?
No, there's a half FTE for next, right?
Oh,
And, you know, and the solution we come up with next year might be how we fill the gap when the half unit goes back to ASA. I don't know. So that's something that we can think about at that time with more time. But, you know, I guess there's some ASA people here. I wonder if other people have thoughts about that. I'd kind of like to hear from other people on the ASA topic, if anyone.
Well, it's Brad and I, and Brad might not feel 100% comfortable since he's not on continuing contract yet. Do you want to weigh in, Brad?
I really just came here to learn. I was very, you know, invested in it, so.
He's a taxpayer too. So.
Yeah. No, I'm really curious to see what, you know, problems were causing this, and we've talked about solutions here and there. I just wanted to see where you guys came as a group. I know I have middle school experience, so I mean, I'm open to whatever we need to do, although I really love the staff.
Oh, sorry. Were you done?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think I heard Meredith say that it's not a given which person would be.
Yes, and Darcy's been very clear about that.
Yeah.
Extraordinarily clear. So we've appreciated that. Since I became aware that there was possibilities, I brainstormed some ideas that might work at ASA. The idea of how short term it is or long term, because that's a big change. If there So there could be an opening, and then that would mean, that could mean that we don't have somebody to share. We don't have the, I think your phrase was spare capacity? Is that your phrase?
Yeah, that's driven by the student numbers.
Right, but if we lost another staff member, we wouldn't have the spare capacity.
Well, we would be replacing staff.
I don't think that's an option that's on the table right now.
Okay, good, that's cool to hear. I think that the going up and down the hill, the sharing staff for classroom teachers is problematic, mostly because the time schedule, if you start at OMS and you come to ASA, we end at 3-ish, OMS ends at 2:13-ish. So that's problematic for staff, for salaries. The whole thing of, I know in other districts, when you're a teaching administrator, it's frequently that you get half a teaching salary and half administrator salary, so that might be a way to save some money if that was the option the board chose. But since the board didn't, is looking like they're not full on that one. I think there's ways to address and have the half-time teacher be at ASA, like have 2.5 and 2.5 classrooms for 4th and 5th grade, and one of us share a 4th and 5th grade teacher. So we have 5 teachers in those 2 grades. So it's still, but that's just an idea. I haven't discussed it fully with Darcy. She knows that I have one of my brainstorming ideas. But it really, the whole thing is unsettling because there's so many moving parts and it adds extra stress from our perspective. And it's also the time of year when you're not. I fully understand that 6th grade group, having lived with them, and I know that adding to them, anyone, would just make their unique chemistry that much more to deal with. But they're great kids, and all of our kids are. So I'm really, I understand the support for that. I would have wanted support last year, having 2021 of those particular chemistry of kids. I've had classes in the past in Orna where I had 24 in a 1st grade room, and it worked. But it was the chemistry of the kids. I've had other classes where I've had 10, and it was horrible for me. And for the kids, it wasn't the best. So you really need to look at the chemistry of the particular group. Even though the number might be low, it's not just a numbers game. You said earlier that we want to do what's best for the kids. And I've heard Meredith say that unless it was driven by absolute crisis budget situation, this isn't her first choice. I hope I'm reflecting that correctly.
Yes.
So I, as both my teacher hat and my taxpayer hat, I would really like you to think about some other options in order to solve all of this.
We do have a budget, pretty serious budget issue here.
Yep.
In my view, going out and hiring another full-time 1 FTE for the middle school is not an option right now.
And I'm not saying that that would be my first choice either, for a number of reasons. What I'm saying is that what I heard you guys saying is that you wanted, or you were back to the shared teacher between ASA and middle school.
I don't think we're on any specific model.
Okay.
We're on some model where ASA gives some help for that class to OMS. Exactly what that looks like, who that looks like, what time of day that looks like, is all up in the air and up to the administrative team to figure out. Obviously in conformance with the CBA, to address.
Because there's a whole lot of, the moving parts are exponential. Every more we talk about it.
Yeah.
You asked for ASA feedback. I just know that there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think that there's, I appreciate the transparency, even being allowed to sit at the big kids table here. I thought I was gonna have to move, because that real knowledge is power in a lot of things, we know where folks are thinking. It's hard, it is a hard position to be in.
I mean, I think we all have said if we didn't have to be moving people around, we wouldn't be doing that. But given that we started this with a 1 3/4 mil tax increase, and we're gonna be asking people next year to pay for a bond, that's a non-starter.
Yeah, I'm not saying to not do something, I'm saying, that because we're all the A team is obviously putting hours, but there's also staff who have, are creative thinkers and critical thinkers that might have something that people go, woo-hoo.
I trust the A team to take that feedback from the staff.
Darcy, just remind me, right now, current fourth grade enrollment is,
32.
current seventh grade or sixth grade enrollment is?
68.
Very hard case to make.
Mhm.
All right, I think we heard from everybody, unless somebody, Sharon, we haven't heard from you, but I'm assuming you're okay. You usually speak up when you want to, so. All right, so unless there's a change of opinion, I think we're gonna go with what I said, that we're going with the 93K model, keeping the current model of the principal and OMS, and the admin team is gonna find some way to creatively and with consensus building to be possible, but ultimately it's the admin team's decision, find a way to get some help with the middle school without adding staff.
So where's this put us mill rate wise?
So it puts us at 0.36 mil increase.
We still have one item we have not
Yeah,
addressed.
the library ed tech.
That's right, that's assuming we don't, cancel the ed tech, library ed tech, we cancel that, that's gonna have another 20.05 effect on the mill.
I will quickly, I'm not in favor of getting rid of that. Related to the STEM program.
I agree.
Big difference.
I'm not in favor either.
From the technology and like this Brain Flower this year has stepped up and really taken on a lot of that level 1 tech support when I'm not around. So,
I'm supportive of keeping it.
So it's definitely nice for the student to have another first skill to go to. Just 'cause
All right. Okay, Meredith, do you feel like you're clear on where we're at?
Yeah, so
Are you
it's
happy
just-
with where we're at?
So we're at, can we just make sure our numbers add
Yeah,
up?
so let me recap. So we're, items 1 through 20 are now gone. That saved us 313,000. Items 22 and 23 are now committed to. That's saving us 31,000 out of this year, and it's also dropping our bank account by 65,000. Item 21, the original 21 has been turned into the 93K version. And item 24 is maintained. Everything on the please don't cut list is maintained. And by my calculations, we save 313 on items 1 through 20. We save 31K on items 22 and 23. We save 93K on original item 21. It's a 313, 31, 93K, and we put 135K into the revenue side.
Yeah.
So let's double check my math, but if I've been doing the math, that should put us down to 0.36 mil. Definitely worth double checking my math first. So 313 plus 31 plus 93 plus 135 equals 572K savings.
Yeah, 573, but we're
Okay.
kind of
I was
rounded
rounding
different.
off, yeah. So 573 drops. Okay, so 727 minus 573 is dropping us down to 154. 154 divided by 430, which is best guess assessment. We heard the assessments are going up and down, but we got to go with what we have right now. So 154 divided by 430 is 0.36 mil.
By your math, by Sophie's math, it is.
By Sophie's math, it's going to be, I can't tell you because we don't even have the evaluation rate right now. But it's
So
going to
did
be
you end
higher.
up with what did you round up for the 850?
I'm fully supportive of
It's gonna be
it.
higher.
I just wanna know what she's wanna know Sophie's.
What you gonna be?
But there's another 110, which is another $250,000, right? She's gonna take
So
total dollars
So,
and turn it
by
into mill rates.
If I did it correctly by Sophie's, then
So we're about 0.5.
a little over 0.5.
That's what I, all right.
Yeah.
But it's not 0.52 million,
I
no
agree.
matter how you
Right.
count it.
agree.
Right.
I'm happy with your math.
So the real answer may be between Sophie, but some years, my math is gonna come out less than Sophie's because these long-term valuations, right, the valuations are.
So in the, we'll talk about
So
that.
can we, so I now have an increase, well, no, this is not right, because we have some things like the 7,000 white MacBooks as expenditure savings, but really the revenue, so we have to, you know.
Several things on the revenue side,
Right.
many things on the expense side.
Yeah, I think I know.
I think we know, we'll work the numbers, and so next meeting, what we'll bring back to you is a budget that reflects the changes that we've agreed upon.
Basically with everything updated.
Yep, and, yes, and so, are there any other details other than those two sheets? Do you still need this sheet? Is that what you said?
I would say,
Because we
yeah,
have all the
the
additions.
actual additions. And
You bring us like 5 more tuitions.
overall budget.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, no more flow charts for now.
Everybody good? Ready to move on?
Knock on doors.
Okay, 5-minute buyout break, and then move on to the next item.
Actually, this year.
Thank you for coming. That's just how you want to spend your time. Well, they do come from
We've got the probationary policies, we're still, it's like a long meeting. I mean, that's basically what happens.
I mean, is there something that
Yeah, probationary teachers. Yeah, policies are really important.
she would, now, and she can't actually work with you? I mean, I will be bummed about that personally, but my kids as well. I said, we're fine up to it. I swear they do that tomorrow, and so.
turn it off earlier. There's a little timer, but it's.
We're gonna have, we've got another 45 minutes to go. Okay. All right.
So did anything change? See it work? That's all.
Hello. Okay. Microphones are. Seltzer? I don't know how much they are.
What kind of seltzer? Blackberry? You all set?
Yes, thank you.
Test.
We've been doing funky things. Hockey said it was something to do with that, so that's why I was like, so it's like, oh, sound systems, there's no stuff, so rewiring. I'm glad the flexibility, because I think I've rewired this one.
We're flying into Knoxville, and then we're going to Asheville, and then we're going to Atlanta, and then we're going to Chattanooga, and back to Knoxville. So it's kind of like whirlwind, just trying to see every person we've ever met.
Oh, yeah.
Are we going home now?
Yeah.
My kids are freaking out, so.
No, I want us all to go home. What do we have left?
Angie collects them down in her.
No, we do actually have stuff left. Bummer.
Everybody, yep.
Thanks for tomorrow, Jay. Thanks for tomorrow.
Are you heading out?
Thanks for the reminder. Yeah, I'd stay longer, but I had SATs this morning.
Hey, Eli, you got a Mark's a Yankees fan, just so you know, you're sitting next to him.
Oh, well, they're losing pretty badly right now.
They are, I know. Adds to my irritation.
Are we ready to roll? We still have a unfortunate number of things to get through.
We are. Angie, I'm going to take notes while she stepped out.
Okay. All right. So next up on the agenda is probationary teacher contract renewal process, and I think probably the key word in there is process. So just as a reminder, every teacher in their first, second, and third year has to have their contract renewed. That's a probationary law that's from the state. It's also built into the CBA. And the way the law is written, the superintendent nominates. Basically, the superintendent cannot nominate somebody. And at that point, that person can appeal to the board, but if they don't appeal to the board, that's done. But if the superintendent nominates somebody, then the board has to approve. It's much like a teacher hire. It's basically being rehired 3 years in a row. And we've handled this in various ways at different times. At some times, I think, to be honest, we've been a complete rubber stamp. At other times, the board has been more interested in the process. Last year, we got a description of the evaluation process, and that was kind of where we stopped, and then the board took a vote. And I know at least a couple board members have had an interest in at least revisiting the process. So what I want to do tonight is only discuss process and to get a meshing between the admin team and the board on the process expected. And then we will either on the 24th or May 1st, but definitely before May 15th, we will have another meeting where we will actually discuss, have the discussion we need to lead towards a vote of yes or no, yay or nay. So tonight, we're not discussing individuals. We're not trying to get information to lead to a yay or nay. We're trying to calibrate the board's expectations so that the admin team knows when we have that April 24th or May 1st discussion, what we're wanting them to bring in. So Meredith and I have been going back and forth on this. I think it's fair to say we've had very congenial conversations, but we have also brought different perspectives to the table. So when that happens, one of the things I like to do is go back to the MSBA, Maine School Board Association handbook, and they pull things out. So the section that's relevant is supervision and evaluation of staff, which starts on page 9.3 and runs really through about half the page. The last half of that page is not relevant. The board's roles in supervision should be limited to policies on the supervision and evaluation process, which we've done. Sharon led an extensive committee process with the teachers, didn't really involve the board, but brought that to a board for approval, and that turned into a policy which is in place. Obviously, we can always revisit policy if we want. Evaluating the superintendent, we all know that. That's happening in a different time and place. Receiving reports from the superintendent on the implementation and results of the supervision and evaluation process, and then acting, right? This is the nomination, and then the approving the employment nominations and superintendent recommendations regarding staff renewals, non-renewals, and dismissals. So probably the key paragraph is this next one. Board members should recognize the superintendent is responsible for the supervision and in conjunction with the principals, for the supervision and evaluation of all teachers and other school system employees. And in fact, would be absolutely, and nobody's ever proposed this, but just to take the extreme hypothetical, there's no basis for a board member to sit in an evaluation of a teacher, right? That's entirely the function of the admin team. And then that bumps up against the sentence about the board taking the vote on the renewal. The superintendent should provide sufficient information on the supervision, evaluation process, and staff performance, so both process and performance, for the board to be confident of the quality of the instruction and school operations. The rest of this really, I think, defines probationary, which, and then it points out there's a kind of a separate issue that the board is supposed to remain untainted in the cases of grievances, complaints, and things. But that's really, none of those apply to probationary teachers. So really, as far as I'm concerned, it kind of stops at that paragraph. So what we want to get to is an understanding between the board and the principals of what sufficient information about process and performance is going to be. And I think it can start as a public discussion. It may be that if we want to talk to individual principals, that is more appropriate in an executive session. I do hope that this is not something we spend a long time on, given everything to do tonight, but that's where we're at. I mean, I guess I'll just start for myself. I'm uncomfortable with the notion that I'm a rubber stamp vote. I'm elected by people to take my role of the board seriously, and one of the roles that's clearly given to me is voting on teachers, not selecting the teachers, that's the admin team, or evaluating the teachers, but taking a vote, yes or no, on teachers. Once a teacher makes it out of the probationary period, they are basically with us for life. As a school board chair, I've only learned even more how hard it is to actually dismiss or non-renew a tenured teacher. It's harder to fire a tenured K-12 teacher than it is to fire a tenured professor. I will say that much because I can make that comparison. So they are with us for life, which means that that's at least $1.5 million commitment. The time when they're up for third year renewal and you take a vote, that's $1.5 million commitment that you're making. And I feel a need to make sure that I'm doing, and it's not just $1.5 million, it's $1.5 million in our most important function, which is teaching students. So I feel a need to be very unrubber stampy and very much doing due diligence. And for me, I'm going to need a fair amount of information to feel comfortable in that role. I've been thinking about this a lot. There's a tier 1 and a tier 2, I think, of evaluating teachers. And I would just point out that I actually, right this month, I'm doing they're professors, but I'm doing professor evaluations. I'm doing classroom visits, and I'm writing evaluation letters as part of a promotion and tenure committee. So obviously not the same thing as K-12. I don't mean to overextend that, but I do have some comprehension of both the goals and also the limitations of all those things. And in my thinking, there's kind of a first level evaluation of basically, is the classroom working, right? You walk into a classroom, are the kids paying attention? Is the classroom well managed? Are the students on task? Is their material being covered? That's clearly the topic of the course. And that's kind of a tier 1, and we certainly hope that's happening.
But of course, the tier 2 is the ultimate objective of teaching, which is not just to have well-behaved students, but to actually teach. And to me, that's a much harder thing to measure. I mean, I know when I walk into a classroom, I can tell in 10 minutes whether we're doing tier 1 or we're not doing tier 1. But the tier 2 is, are we actually changing something in that student's mind? And it's a whole student perspective. It's not purely academic. It's social learning and emotional learning as well as educational learning, and that balance probably changes across the grades. But that's what I actually want to be convinced of before I take a yes vote, is that that second level step of educational outcome is happening, you know, for most of the students that teacher has. And so that's a much harder thing to evaluate. And I'm not entirely, I'll just lay my cards on the table, I'm not entirely convinced that just doing classroom visits is going to get there. So I want to hear an argument made that educational outcome is happening, not just well-behaved classrooms, and you know, and a teacher who's looking efficient and effective in making that well-behaved classroom. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I'll just throw out one more pretty radical idea, which is in Orono, we are lucky enough that we get the best teachers in the larger Bangor region certainly applying for every position. And there is no reason to renew a teacher who's not on the good to great end of the scale. I'm not actually really down with just renewing mediocre teachers. I know there's some time and effort in calling something a mistake and you know, going out to the rehire process, but there's really no reason in my mind we should be passing on anybody who's not a good to great teacher. So those are a few of my thoughts. And you know, expectations and what I'm hoping and looking to be convinced about in 2 weeks or 3 weeks when we do this. I think I'll stop there and see if anybody else, you know, has a thought they want to add, and then we may or may not want to go into some executive session. Anybody else have a thought?
I'm really interested in hearing Meredith, was her contribution with Brian.
So, yeah, I was looking at the same document that Brian was looking at, but in reading just a little further on page 9.5, I mean, one of the things around sharing of information about an employee's evaluation is that Brian said, as he mentioned, that, you know, the legal advice is to try to steer clear of getting involved in that as much as possible in case you're ever grieved. But I think as a general, if you go on that as a general rule, the superintendent may summarize or share relevant portions of an employee's personnel file when consideration is being given to performance evaluation, continuation of employment, or disciplinary action by the board. So I think, you know, what would be helpful is if what has been shared in the past in terms of the rationale for a recommendation to offer a probationary teacher another contract or to move them from that third year to continuing. If it's not been sufficient, I guess it would be helpful to know what's been missing, and I think that's what Brian's trying to get at. But to say student outcome, I think tier 2 is what you said is missing. Mm-hmm. Is that fair to say? That overall that you would like to hear more about student outcomes mm-hmm. in terms of the evaluation of why we're recommending
we don't really
teachers.
Yeah, in the last, all we heard is classroom evaluations happened. So I would like to hear her thoughts on, I mean, I agree. I don't want to read teacher personnel files. I don't think that's a board appropriate action outside of grievance or individual special cases. But I would like to be convinced that each of the teachers I'm going to vote for is certainly meeting tier 1. And I think that's pretty easy to do anecdotally. But yeah, I would also like to be convinced that excellent educational outcomes are happening with that teacher. And I don't need to see a personnel file to see that, but there are many sources of information I have access to. There's many sources of information principals have access to. And I would like that to all add up to, I can in good conscience raise my hand and say, this is $1.5 million investment that's going to have great consequences for kids. And so to get back to your direct point, what's missing is actually individual assessments on tier 1 and tier 2 at a board appropriate anecdotal summary kind of level.
So this would involve really the administrators doing really an executive summary for each employee as to their rationale for making the recommendation. Is that what you're looking for? Because it sounds like in the past, it's been just, this is the process. We conducted walkthroughs, we conducted.
For a while, we didn't even get process.
Okay, so.
We had literally nothing. And now we get a little bit of the process, but in terms of any kind of rationale whatsoever or justification for why we should approve this, we get nothing. And that's.
Well, and also, to be honest, for a while, the walkthroughs weren't happening either, which is a whole nother conversation. They are happening now. So.
Yes. So it's definitely headed in the right direction, but, you know, I agree in many ways where Brian started is we're being asked, I mean, the way I look at this is similar to Brian, but maybe a little bit differently, is that you can look at all the educational research out there. The two biggest things that determine kind of how students perform and the quality of the education they get are what they get in the classroom, what they get at home. And I don't have any control over what they get at home, unfortunately. But we are supposed to. We're charged with kind of overseeing what they get in the classroom. And so when we go to move a teacher from first year probationary to second, or second to third to continuing contract, certainly we're making a huge, it's a huge choice. And I also agree with Brian that this is a very desirable place to teach, and there is no reason, and we know, we've got across all three buildings, we've got plenty of rock star teachers, right? There's no reason we shouldn't have everybody, because it's a desirable place to be, and I don't want to be faced with a situation of, yeah, well, we made this decision after year 3, and now it's year 6, and we could have avoided that. And so I guess I want, and what this would look like, obviously, is going to be shaped by discussions between you and the administrative team, and Shauna and you and Brian, and what you think is best for us to get. But I would like to get something that is certainly board appropriate. I don't want anything that we're not entitled to, and I don't even want to really bump up against the line. But the paragraph you just read, I think, is an important one. I've got too much paper here, but that superintendent summarize or share relevant portions of an employee's personnel file if consideration is being given to performance evaluation and continuation of employment. Like, I want to, when I'm asked to vote in favor of continuation of employment, I want to get enough information for me to say, okay, in good conscience, yep, this is the right vote to take, is to vote to continue this contract. And what that looks like, I'm not 100% clear, but I know it doesn't look like what we get now, which is nothing.
I was wondering what sort of evidence of student learning teachers turn in when they are up for one of these contract renewals. So what kind of evidence do they turn in and that you already have?
So every teacher puts together a student learning outcome as part of their evaluation process, and that's a component of their evaluation. So that's something that is teacher developed, really also in consultation with the administrator, and just nod or if I'm saying something that you guys think is wrong back there. So that's something we have for everyone, and it's highly variable what that is. It's highly variable depending on the content area they teach, and what they choose to use for that. I think that's one source of evidence, and then another source of evidence is any school-based, school-wide assessments or other kind of larger scale assessments we have that we do across a grade level or a school. So that's another source of data that we would have, but not for every content area. We don't have those kinds of assessments outside of, I would say, reading and math and science at some grade levels. So that's kind of a challenge with this. But I think as a starting point, I think I'd like to talk to the admin team to see what their thoughts are on what kinds of data discussions and what kind of data conversations they're having with their teachers during the evaluation process, and if they see that as a way to incorporate that as well as their evaluation of teachers' effectiveness around student outcomes, if they could incorporate that into an executive summary that we could try out for this first round, and see, you know, if that's giving you the information that you feel like you need to make this decision. Because I agree that it doesn't feel right to just say, hey, just trust us, you know, we're the professionals, trust us. But it also, you know, I think needs to be a partnership of, you know, this is what we feel like is the information that we see that for this recommendation, and not to feel, I guess, being second guessed, I guess, is the balance to walk with this. Absolutely. That I think where Brian and I have had really healthy, good discussions and dialogue about it. But I think moving further down the road of giving the board more information to make a really important decision is a direction we need to go. I think we're figuring out that tier 2 is probably the hardest part of it, because I think availability. Go ahead.
I just want to say that one side of it, of course, is saying somebody might not make it to the next level. But I think the other really important side is also celebrating some of the wonderful things that teachers are doing. And Brian's right, there's a peer observation portion of faculty at the University of Maine, but there's also a separate piece where that faculty member puts together why teaching is important to them. And I think that would also help inform the board so that we have a sense of all these innovative things that are happening with these rock star teachers. So it's more than just, okay, rubber stamp, okay, everybody agrees, go home, or we can also see some of the great things that are going on in the classroom. So I see a lot of positives too.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I mean, the nicest vote to take is to, you know, lock in a teacher that's doing a great job and know that we've done a great job getting that person here to influence the lives of our students. That's the best feeling to have.
I guess the concern that I have is this is a significant change from past practice, I would say, and I'm just a little worried about the time frame to prepare what I see as the task that you've asked here. So I think this might be a process. I think what I could say is, you know, we'll talk and figure out what we feel like we could pull together for this next, because it's coming right up, as Brian mentioned. And maybe with that, you can offer some feedback on, we really like, you know, that you included this for all the teachers in your executive summaries. You know, could you incorporate more about this other element? So it's probably going to be a year of kind of figuring things out. The admin are just kind of looking, I don't know how to read their faces. Yeah.
I can't see their faces, so I'll go ahead and comment. I would say that, of course, it's a process, and we should all just be on the pathway of learning more from each other. It's certainly a process at the university that we're still trying to tweak every year, so we don't think we have some sort of lofty expectation.
Brian, are you talking about the paragraph that we used to write? I want to say the last time we did it was maybe 3 years ago, where we wrote a paragraph describing the strengths of the probationary teachers, each of them. Is that what?
Did we do that for probationary or just for hires?
I think it was just for
hires over the summer, but I also have the probationary. I just looked at it this morning, where I would say it was 3 years ago, where we wrote a description of the strengths of the probationary teachers that we were recommending to Meredith or whoever it was back then. But I had a paragraph for each teacher that was on the probationary contract and every teacher that was going up to the continuing contract.
Did those come to the board?
It must have been before my time.
Yeah, it was to the board for the list of.
You remember what the date? You remember what the date was on that?
My Google Drive, so.
Because I don't remember ever seeing
No.
that.
Which would have put it before maybe 2014. We wouldn't have been.
So that sounds like we have a starting place with
Sounds-
what, you know,
yep.
has been done in some point in the distant past.
Yeah, I mean.
It was last
It may not have made it to the board after the work you did, which would not be a good thing, obviously.
I've got piles at home, and I haven't taken anything, as my wife could tell you, I haven't taken anything out of those piles. I could look, but I don't remember ever seeing.
But anyway, more to your point, I mean, yes, I think that is the kind of thing I'm thinking. I mean, know that my standard is not just tier 1, but the kind of tier 2 learning outcomes, and it's good to excellent, but the format you described could absolutely address those criteria.
And obviously, my sense is that you guys are all doing this work obviously anyway, right? You're all doing these thorough evaluations of these probationary period teachers. So no one, I don't think anybody's asking, at least I'm not going to speak for anybody else. I'm not asking you to do any additional work in terms of the evaluation you're doing. What I would like is some kind of distillation of all the work you're doing that's appropriate for us, but that gives me enough information as a board member to, as Brian said, in good conscience, yes, this person is doing a great job and they deserve to be retained for another year. They deserve to be moved from probationary to continuing contracts. So I'm not asking for more evaluatory work, 'cause you're doing that anyway, right? That's part of your job, and you're doing that. But what it sounds like you prepared, that I don't remember ever seeing it, is some distillation of all that work you're doing. I think Meredith used the term executive summary, that, I can look at it as a board member and say, okay, great, I am confident that this person has been evaluated thoroughly. The strengths are outlined here, and I can go ahead and vote with that. Or if I look at it and say, there's some stuff in here that maybe concerns me a little bit, then maybe we go into executive session so that you could expand more. I mean, that's an option too, based on what the executive summary looks like. But what you're describing sounds like it would meet at least what I'm looking for.
I just had 4 bulleted points under each teacher's name, their biggest strengths.
Well, essentially, it's that, and it's the administrator's justification for why this person should be moved forward. I'm assuming if we're getting the name from Meredith, that you're convinced that they deserve to be moved forward. Meredith's convinced that they deserve to be moved forward. I'm not disagreeing with that. I just want to know what led to, what went into make your decision-making process, any of the 3 of you or 4 of you, because you're the ones making that observation on the ground. So you're best equipped to say, okay, here's why I'm recommending this. You've convinced, if it gets to us, unless it's an appeal, you've managed to convince the superintendent. So we look at it and, okay, great. And that's what I'm looking for.
Yep. I mean, and just to react a little more to what you were saying, Darcy, I think that is the essence of it. But I would want to know it's a mixture of strengths and weaknesses and the evidence for that, right? So
I feel a little less comfortable sharing weaknesses.
I don't have a strong attachment to the strength and weakness format. I mean, like I said, I want to be convinced that they're having great educational outcomes. That's my litmus test phrase. And I am a scientist, so convinced includes some evidence, not just opinion. But I also recognize there's limits to the amount of evidence that you can muster in evaluating people of any kind, not just teachers. But that's whatever convinces of that is what I'm looking for. And to pick up on a little bit of a theme that Mark said, we definitely don't, we know you're all overworked, and I absolutely appreciate the fact that every one of you work incredibly hard and are overworked, and I'm not trying to create more work, so I'm just going to highlight again this phrase, summarize or relevant portions. So I don't want to see the whole personnel file, don't want to see the whole evaluation that you hand to the teacher or that you hand to Meredith, but I read that to say you could be cutting and pasting, particular relevant pieces, so that might help with the workload. In that sense, you can take the key sentences here and there and cut and paste. I think that, I don't know what Meredith thinks, but at that level, I read that as consistent with the recommendations.
Yeah, I think that, I'm glad that we're referencing the school board handbook, because it gives some guidance around this, and I think that relevant portions, summaries, might include, I wouldn't call them weaknesses. We put growth areas in evaluations. I mean, I think to just say this person has these strengths and not to say where they're growing is missing, you know, a really important part of all of our development. So, I mean, I would be an advocate for us to put in, you know, these growth areas and what they're working on and what their goals are. I think that shows people who are willing to move forward. But, you know, I think we just have to stick to what's relevant for them to make this decision. If someone's growth area is, you know, an area that's kind of a basic, concerning area of some of the tier 1 operational or observable kind of teacher behaviors, I think that's something that if we're making that recommendation, we need to be able to say why we're making that recommendation with those growth or weakness areas, if you want to call them that, in place, because maybe there are these other things that are just amazing that outweigh that for now. So I think we need to talk a little bit, about how we structure those, because I think it would be good to have some consistency. And you know, I think if we bring kind of our first attempt at that to this first round, then we can kind of discuss them and get the feedback on what the board thinks about those.
Brian, what did you say your litmus test for Tier 2 was? You had a phrase.
Excellent educational outcomes for students.
So how do we measure that shy of test scores?
I think test scores.
Yeah.
Test scores could be a piece of it.
And like Meredith said with the test scores, not every subject matter is scored, and you'd have to have ideally a beginning of the year score and an end of the year score to measure the growth.
Yeah, I'm not looking to turn this into a highly quantitative exercise. I do think I personally think any personnel evaluation, which definitely includes teacher evaluations, is ultimately qualitative. Doesn't mean test scores couldn't be part of it. You know, NWEA's is there, but also at the high school, you have a lot of teachers are teaching an AP class. That's basically a nationalized standardized test. But you know, and at ASA there may be nothing that's relevant from a test score point of view. But I think there are ways to get at it, and I'll put this on the table. Pretty much every teacher in the district, I've had 10 parents tell me what they think about that teacher. I'm pretty good at filtering parents' opinions. I don't, you know, when one person's mad, that doesn't translate to anything in my brain, but when 10 people tell me this is not working so well, that translates to something different in my brain. For high school students and middle school students, I see a lot of them, and even if I don't have to ask them, they talk about their teachers. I hear a lot of opinions from the students too. That's only a piece of information. It's, you know, and it's certainly not, I'm not saying that's like more important than the principals. It's probably on any meaningful level less important than the perspective of an expert in the building, but I do hope that what I'm hearing is consistent, not with the one parent who's whiny, but I do hope it's consistent with broadly what I hear from students and parents as well. And I do think students, and I don't know, I think thoughtful students think about educational outcomes. I think most parents look a lot at educational outcomes, and most of the feedback I hear is I am getting in it, you know, there is a positive educational outcome or not a so I hope I don't know, that's not going to happen this year, obviously, but that's something to think about incorporating, and I don't have any specific suggestions about where that comes, but that is another, at the university, we do run student evaluations. Every teacher gets evaluated by every student in their class every year, and you got to read those with a major grain of salt. Students are sometimes mature and sometimes not, and I'm not pushing or advocating for that, but you're right, educational outcome is a hard thing to get at. Tests are maybe part of the story. I do think, especially to the extent a principal is a subject matter expert in that field, right, which is easier for Darcy and harder for Reg or Heath. Heath's probably somewhere in between. I think people walking in the classroom can tell what depth is this material being taught at. If you're outside your subject area, I think it's a lot harder to tell that just from being in a classroom. I think there's information floating out in the people who are supposed to be having these educational outcomes and the people who spend 10 hours a day with them and their parents. I don't know how we capture that, but I do hope, you know, parents talk to principals too. And students talk to principals too. That's part of it as far as I'm concerned as well. I don't know exactly where I'm going with that, but all of which is to say educational outcomes not easy, but it's our job, and I think the answer is a multifaceted, multi-pronged approach, and I just named 3 tools on that area. And I probably just freaked the principals out too, which is not the goal. So I want to harken back to what Meredith said. This is a process. My goal is to get this process going before we reach a place where the principal's saying yes, and I'm saying I really can't vote for this teacher. And as far as I know, I'm not in that place right now. But my goal is to get this process going before that ever happens, and actually to reach a point where that never could happen. So that's my thought on it. But I do want to recognize this is a process. This is not going to get perfect or a home run this year. This is going to be incremental progress.
Again, I'm kind of being repetitive here, but I think for where we are right now, and given that we're going to be addressing this in either 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I'm firmly of the belief, and I have no indication to think otherwise, and I would hope it's not the case, but I'm firmly of the belief that all 4 of our administrators are doing this work thoroughly as it is. And so really they're making these assessments on how is this teacher performing as an educator? What kind of outcomes are they producing? Now they're using a mix of quantitative and qualitative data to come to that assessment, but they've got the mix that they're using already, and I'm not arguing about the mix. What I want to, maybe down the line we do, but not right now. Right now, they're doing this work. All I'm asking for, and what will satisfy me, is just a short summary. They've done all this work. They've made this recommendation. I just want a short summary of it so I can say, okay, this is why they've decided this person is doing a great job as a teacher and deserves to be moved forward to the 2nd probationary year or the 3rd, or why they should go on continuing contract. That's all I'm looking for. Now, maybe down the line, in a few years as we get this under our belt, then maybe well, you know, this data point might want to be included, or maybe this. I mean, but that's not, at least for me, that's not where I am right now. It's just a matter of, you guys are doing all this work already. What can you give to us that doesn't add to a huge amount to your workload, but just this kind of short summary of, here's my thinking on why I made this recommendation. Here's the evidence. You know, I saw this. I observed this. These test scores were this. I mean, whatever the mix is that you're already using, that's what I want. It's just a summary of that. I don't want anything. I'm not asking you to do any additional work or go track down additional data points or anything like that. It's just a summary of, you're already doing it. Summarize it. It's almost like you're making I made this decision, here's why I made it, quick. And so then we look at it, yeah, okay, that's what I'm looking for.
I don't have anything to add, and I don't personally feel a need to go into executive session, but if the principals want to comment, question, or if they want to dig into, make it concrete and need to go into executive session, I'm open to that. So anything the principals want to comment or ask? I say principals, but this includes Sharon too.
I just want to come up. Can you hear me from
No, you need to come up, please.
So, having worked with the Supervision and Evaluation Committee for the last 4 years now, Brian, an awful lot of what you are asking for in terms of the depth actually is in the summative evaluation. I didn't hear anything that you're asking for that we're not putting into the summative evaluation. We're commenting on strengths. We are recommending areas of growth. We're setting up sometimes plans a formal word, but suggestions as to how we're going to monitor that. So for probationary people, we've done the walkthroughs, we've done the 2 formal observations, we've looked at lesson plans, we've looked at the portfolio, we've gone through the student learning objectives, which is how is that teacher using data to inform their instruction. We've had those conversations. The work we're doing with the probationary staff is pretty intensive. So as I'm processing what you're asking, I'm practically envisioning, I think what you would like perhaps, and would be useful to you, is first a little bio. You got that person's resume, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago. I think it would be helpful for you to get a snapshot of who is this person, what are their credentials, how did they come to us? And then depending on where they are in that probationary cycle, I can envision us bringing forth some of that information that you would find, and it could very well be a cut and paste right out of the summative. You will see, if I'm bringing forward probationary staff for hiring, you can be assured in my summative I'm talking about a long-term plan. We bring great teachers into our continuing contract status, but they're still a work in progress, unless, we've been lucky enough to hire someone who's very mature and have those years of experience, and then they're up on the scale. But I also just want to say that if we're bringing in people who are coming into the field, I would worry that my recommendations for what I want to see them grow to over the next few years, I wouldn't want that to be taken as a negative, meaning that it's not something that that would question why I would be bringing them forth. I think our administrative team is working hard to utilize our supervision evaluation model and bring forth to you the very best candidates so that we're confident that we have good people that we're bringing forward. That's just my commenting that I wanted to make. I don't think it's anything that we have to go back and reinvent, but I'd like to see a model format where we're giving you some of that bio, really talking about the strengths. And I would just caution you that if we're putting in areas of growth, that is what they are. When an administrator brings forth to you a recommendation that this person should go on to a continuing contract, I would want you to have confidence that that person has done due diligence and is making a good recommendation. So that's what the supervision evaluation process is about. Any questions?
Everything you say.
Everything you say makes sense. I mean, it sounds absolutely correct to me that the work is already being done. It's just a communication issue. And I completely understand that part of your job is growing teachers, and that's why we have a 3-year probation instead of a 1-year probation, especially if you're getting somebody who's brand new. It's a process. And
it is.
I fully support that, and I wouldn't think you were doing your job if you weren't helping them grow. So. Anything else on this? Anybody in the back? Further questions, comments? Okay. All right.
Can we clarify, maybe this is in our next, when we get to the end and talk about our meetings. So I'll wait and ask the question about our meetings when we get to that part, because I think when we bring this back, kind of depends on how we're handling our meeting schedule for the next.
Yep, fair enough. Yep. Okay. Already handled the request for travel abroad. So we have co-curricular nominations. I would make a motion to approve the following for co-curricular positions: Alex Sayers, OHS Spring Play Director; Dan Perkins, OMS Drama Spring Play; Catherine McElvin, OMS Assistant Drama Spring Play; Alex Caballero, OMS Lunch Supervisor, and that would be it. Is there a second?
I will second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Should we note that what's on the agenda is short of one?
Oh, did I miss?
It's correct.
It's correct on, so it's correct on that one.
Yeah.
So what the public got is correct. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. So next up, we have policies.
Who seconded?
Jake seconded, passed unanimously. I would be tempted to postpone policies, but these are genuinely very small tweaks. And, I'm looking through my policies here. All right, so we have, first up, we have JLF. You'll recall we had our second read and passed this at the last board meeting. We had feedback from the school counselor, Ms. Earhart at ASA, that she had 2 concerns. We addressed this at the policy committee, and I will just note Heath was able to attend, and it was nice to have him there too. We made 2 small changes, so I'm looking through. So in Roman numeral 2A, we clarified, rather than just leaving it up to somebody to divine when they go to DHHS and when they go to the district attorney, we actually spelled it out. So the last sentence in 2A was added. So if the suspected, they always go to DHHS, and if the suspected adult abuser is not a parent or guardian, they must also make a report to the district attorney. So that was added, so the policy is now clear. You don't have to go read the MRSA statutes, you can just read the policy. The other change that was made, it was in section 6, confidentiality. Again, the last sentence was added. It was pointed out to us that oftentimes one person may know that a report was made to DHHS, but it's often wise to let, example, the school counselor or the classroom teacher for that student know, so that they can, adjust expectations and behavior, have reasonable expectations around behavior. So the sentence, school officials may notify teachers, school counselors, nurses, or other employees who work directly with the child to provide emotional support for the child if it is in the best interest of the child, but may not notify any other person. So that's consistent with law and what we understand law and best practices. So I would make a motion to adopt policy JLF as the 2 changes that I just recommended and as presented to the board.
I will second.
Any discussion?
There's a different font. You may just want to go through and standardize the font.
Yep, we'll work on formatting. Angie can do that without our vote, so thank you. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Okay. The other policy is I'm trying to find my copy of it. IHBAC, child find, got it, thanks. But in the end, all we did, this had not changed since the RSU, so we changed Riverside Regional School Unit 26 to Regional School Unit, and we changed one line from age 5 to age 4 because we now have pre-K, first sentence, thank you. At the end of that first line, we changed that from 5 to 4, and we added the second paragraph, which was required by law. And those were the only changes, so I'm recommending that we adopt this as a revision to this policy. So I would make a motion to adopt the revised IHBAC with the 2 changes just noted. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay. Next up is calendar. So you received a calendar. Am I correct? There were no changes from the last time we looked at this?
I'm trying to remember. We did. I'm trying to remember when we changed.
I think the March one had
22nd.
already been moved.
It's already been moved. Okay. So no change.
But that was moved to line it up with the university spring
Right.
break, which was the intention.
Yes, that's right. So, yes, no change. And when we went to UTC, there was no change needed as a result of that. So the only other thing I would add is that Darcy and I met with Sophie and Mitch about the early release care program that they help support. And I think we have a good idea for next year to help make that a more workable solution that can be relied upon. We have both agreed to split the cost of subsidizing that to make sure it happens regardless of enrollment. It looks like it could be maybe $500 if this year, the same enrollment this year happens next year. But I think it's worth that investment to make sure we can offer something that parents can rely upon. And I think the more parents know they can rely upon it, the more people will continue to sign up for it. So that's just an update on an area I know has been a concern to you. But I guess along with that, they cannot provide childcare for the 2 teacher workshop days because they fall during university break weeks. They haven't been offering the October day childcare anyway. So just to note, that's a limitation of how we've structured our calendar with the university calendar.
Great. So I would make a motion to approve the calendar as presented. Is there a second?
I will second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? It's adopted. Jake helpfully pointed out I passed C2, the evaluation surveys for 2017-18. So we did discuss this at the policy subcommittee meeting. I think what we came up with is a long-term plan that we would like to implement as policies come the fall. And what we were proposing is that we would have a, I think it was superintendent in January, board in February, principals in March, and have a climate survey, basically overall happiness with the district and the schools in May, and recognizing that there could be one or potentially more than one additional survey for issues of the day or issues of the year, but to kind of get on a calendar of expecting those 4 surveys at those times every year. So we do need to change some policies to do that, but it's not urgent because we already did the superintendent. The board is not in policy, so there's basically 2 things we have to decide tonight. One is we need to give them permission to go ahead with the administrator survey ASAP, so I'm going to make a motion in a minute to suspend the rules and just authorize the admin team and the superintendent to design a survey for this year and to go ahead with it. And then we'll actually work through questions and calendars and everything in the fall for policy. The other thing we have to decide is whether the board wants to run something in, say, June this year, or if we just say, you know what, we missed a year, but we're going to get back on cycle next year. So let's deal with the admin survey. There is a very old policy kicking around that does not match what we're doing, and we do have to do an admin survey by the CBA, and also I think do a 360 all stakeholder survey by best practice. So I'm going to make a motion to suspend the rules, which basically means we're breaking the policy, and authorize the admin team and the superintendent to design and send out in the next month an admin survey that's 360 all stakeholder. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, since the suspension of the rules requires a 2/3 vote, which I guess is no different than a majority at this point, but all those in favor of the motion, discussion, in favor? Okay. All right, so you have what you need to get the admin thing done.
And did you say it was in the next month?
I did say that,
Okay.
I thought that was the calendar you were wanting to do.
No, I was just clarifying.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
So I think
if
it
it
needs to
slips
be-
a week, I don't think anybody would care. Okay, so the next question is board. Do we want to try and get one out in June, or do we want to just say, we discussed a bit in the policy subcommittee whether there's even value to doing the board one. I think the overall feeling we came back with is, aside from the fact it's fair to let us be 360 just like everybody else, is that in particular, I think a lot of parents will talk to us regardless of whether we have a survey, but a lot of teachers don't feel we're approachable, so it's a good way for a teacher to communicate with the board. So I generally definitely favor the board survey. It's just a question of, do we want to design one for June and run one in June, or do we just want to get on the cycle and be more consistent with what we did last year and just wait till February of next year? I don't have a strong thought one way or the other.
Either do I.
I guess I don't either. I do think for me, the biggest concern here is equity, kind of in fairness that, if we're doing this for everyone else, that we obviously should be subjected to that as well. I would prefer that we do it on a standard cycle, so if we wait till February, it's not the end of the world. On the other hand, I could be convinced to want to run one in June and then to run again in February, but I know I'm in the minority. I'm survey fatigue is less of a concern for me, and I think it's more of a concern, and it's a legitimate concern for sure. So I mean, I'm willing to go with either of those options. So I don't know if Michelle has any thoughts on this to convince us, because nobody seems to have any.
I heard her.
Oh, she's done. Okay.
I'm here.
Oh.
My internet keeps cutting in and out. I don't have any thoughts other than, I think it's fair that we go ahead and do it. Is the issue that we wouldn't have time to revise the survey? I missed a little bit of the intro.
Well, the reasons not to do it in June would be, A, it would kind of be breaking people's expectations that it happens in the winter, which we have established once already, but I guess broken once already. And B, just that we have so many things on our plate between now and June. It's not a good time to be, we would have to vote on it as a board. It's not a good time to be designing a survey as a board. And I do personally think we should move away from the ISLIC standards, which have some intimidating language for people. And
So would a compromise plan be to work on this a little bit in the post-budget time, and then release something in the fall when people are more eager to have an opinion perhaps about the school board and share it?
well, I guess my first thought is the post-budget time is not exactly a break. I mean, we have principal evaluations. We usually have us look at the end-of-year test scores. It pretty much is busy through the end of June. And the other thing I'd say is if we get to February, I mean, I personally would just, sorry, if we get to the fall, I'd just wait to February. Let me just add one more data point, which in terms of the equity question, I think my consensus out of the policy subcommittee, and they're all sitting here in the room so they can tell me, the people who are going to be surveyed this year were superintendent and the principals, and I didn't walk away thinking any of them had this feeling of, you're stabbing us in the back if you don't survey yourself this year. Feel free to contradict me if I'm wrong, but I got a sense people were pretty equanimous about just waiting and getting back on the February schedule. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, though. So I guess for that reason, I lean a little bit to just waiting until February and designing it carefully and doing it that way.
Maybe.
And there's no one's seat is up for election next year, is it?
There's gotta be somebody up.
It would.
Aaron, maybe.
Aaron.
Or is it?
Aaron and I go together, so it's the two of us.
There's always somebody up.
Oh.
Well, anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, somebody is.
I think maybe one solution to this, and the problem could be that we could commit, take a vote and commit to doing an evaluation or putting an evaluation of us out there in February of 2019, and then we're on the record, we're going to do it, we're going to get back on that schedule, and then at some point, probably in the fall, we get down to serious work on what that survey looks like, we approve it, it goes out in February, and then I think that solves not all of our concerns, but most of them.
Yeah, and that also lets us sync up the questions to the extent they should be synced up with other surveys.
Yeah, I agree.
Design it. I like that. All right, I'll make a motion that the board commits, regardless of policy outcomes in the fall, to conduct a survey on the board next February.
I will second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay. It's late. I know curriculum subcommittee is meeting this Thursday, right? Other than that, anybody have a pressing need to report on a subcommittee? Okay. Any other business?
I have one item. I just want to clarify that on the vote on the school calendar that I was a no on that.
Oh, I missed that. I'm sorry.
So just want to make sure the record's right on that.
Okay.
And then the other thing I have is not really other business, but it's a question really for Meredith. I committed to being on some committee last meeting.
CNA.
Okay.
Yes.
Am I gonna be given anything on that, and is that not yet?
Yes, not yet.
Okay. I was going through the notes from the last meeting, and I saw that I had committed to this, and then I realized maybe I had dropped a ball.
Missed it.
Okay.
No.
Perfect. Thank you. That's it. That's all I have.
Okay. Other business? Future agenda items?
Could I, for a future agenda item, I'd like to add as a discussion item, the stipend committee's been working on a formal process for adding a stipend. So I'd like to just discuss that with the rest of the board, get their take on it.
Great.
I'm sorry, it's the process for adding a stipend.
And we may or may not have a policy in that area that could come together at the same time. But that's looking like a big policy change, so we should definitely discuss that regardless. Okay, any public comment? All right, future meetings. At the current time, the board has approved the following meetings: April 24th, Orono Town Council Chambers, May 1st. Orono Town Council Chambers, May 15th is the annual budget meeting. I think we should think through, the main things we have to do are take the final budget, which I think we have done, but you never know. But at the moment, it's looking like a short conversation, knock on wood. Take the final budget vote and sign, and then a week later, we have to sign the warrants.
Okay.
And we also, by May 15th, I'm sorry.
So the first is when we're signing warrants, May 1st.
Well, I'm currently thinking it lines up. We can take a vote on the budget April 24th. We can sign the warrants on May 1st. And then the other big thing on the agenda would be this, the continuing contracts, which has to be done by May 15th. So we could squeeze that in on the 24th. Historically, May 1st has been kind of a show up, sign the warrants, so go home, especially since it's coming the week after. But so basically the question is, do we want to do, I guess we have three choices. We could do the continuing contracts, probation contracts on the 24th. We could make May 1st into a full-blown meeting. In theory, we could do it later in the month to give the principals more time and have, for example, a May 8th meeting as well. I'm open to guidance on what the board would like. So it boils down to which of those 3 weeks do we want to do the continuing contracts?
I think doing it on April 24th is really putting the squeeze on our administrator. So that option is not, I guess, is the least attractive of the three for me. If May 1st is adequate time, then I'm fine with maybe not making it a full-blown meeting, but adding that to the agenda rather than just showing up to sign warrants. But if May 8th will help out, I'm willing to do that as well. Keeping in mind that's finals week, and I don't know what my schedule, I mean, it's out there, but I don't know what it looks like yet. Okay, all right.
The 8th.
So then maybe if we want to stick to a Tuesday, we don't have to stick to a Tuesday.
We don't have to stick to a Tuesday either. Principals, is there a big difference for you between May 1st and May 8th or May 10th? What?
So,
Would you prefer that extra week then? So we can't go on a Tuesday, so maybe we
We'll
should
have to
send out.
schedule by email to find a
Yeah,
time.
I think we should send out other options so that we're not conflicting with anyone.
All right, so we'll still aim for the budget vote on the 24th. At the moment, the May 1st meeting is a sign the warrants meeting, and we will schedule by email a time between May 1st and May 15th to do the continuing contracts meeting. And I guess at that meeting, we can pick up any stipend or quickie issues as well.
Okay.
Does that give you what you need, Meredith? Does that make sense?
yeah, I guess, I think it might be good for us to talk as an admin group to decide if May 1st is too aggressive or not. I think it would be good to talk a little bit before.
Okay.
To see if we maybe feel like it's more of a copy and paste of what data we already have and the evaluation and the summative, or if it's kind of coming up with new narratives. So maybe we can report back
You
on the
can
24th
consult.
as to which way we want to recommend that.
Right, you can consult, and if you decide you would prefer an extra week or so of time, then we'll schedule by email. Otherwise, we'll go with the 1st.
The other thing I would say is we don't have another board meeting until the 29th, according to my schedule. And it just seems like a long time this time.
That's a long time to take care of a little business. I mean,
So-
honestly, that's one reason I'm kind of thinking, I guess we can't do the 8th. Something in the middle of May might be better than just the week after the 24th.
Yeah, so.
All right.
We'll consider that
We-
on the 24th.
Yep. Okay.
Good to me.
Any requests for information or follow-up? All right, motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Very long meeting. Thank you, everybody.
We haven't had one of these in a while.
Hey, these were the norm last year when I was coming.
Yeah, we haven't had one of these in a while. Bye, Michelle.